The room was too quiet for how many people were in it. 8, by my count 9, if you included the paralegal by the door pretending not to listen. The chairs were sleek leather, the table cold mahogany. I sat at the far end, hands folded in my lap, my coat still damp from the morning rain. No one looked at me. Celeste sat at the head. She always did like symmetry. Her blouse was ivory, her earrings simple studs, and her hair tied back in a perfect knot. Beside her, 2 men in suits clicked pens and shuffled folders without meeting anyone's eyes. On the wall, a framed print of a mountain range looked out of place too wild for a room so contained. The lawyer, Mr. Haynes, cleared his throat. "We're here to review the will and final estate arrangements of the late Nathaniel Ellison." His voice was gentle, almost clinical. "Per his request, this session will be formal and recorded." I nodded, though no one asked me to. Celeste leaned forward, hands steepled. As Nathaniel's wife and executor of the estate, I'll begin by confirming that all trust documents were finalized prior to his passing. She didn't stumble once. Primary control of the Ellison Foundation has been transferred to my oversight. All liquid assets and intellectual property are under my management. That includes personal investment accounts, the charitable portfolio, and real estate holdings. There was a brief shuffle of papers. The man beside her passed out a thin packet to everyone but me. Then Celeste said it. No distributions are allocated to Mrs. Leora Ellison under the current will. No emotion, no explanation. Just a line item in a spreadsheet. For a moment, I wasn't sure if I'd misheard. I kept my eyes on the smooth wood of the table. No one moved. Then Mr. Haynes gave a small cough, one hand covering his mouth. When he looked up, his eyes met mine across the room, and he did something I didn't expect. He smiled, just slightly, then gave a short, quiet laugh, like he'd seen something coming the rest of us hadn't. I didn't say a word. I just sat there, the air around me turning to ice as my name vanished from the paper. And still, no one passed me a packet. The house felt colder than it should have. I left my coat on when I stepped inside, more out of habit than comfort. The air still carried the scent of white lilies from the funeral, sharp, oversweet, and lingering in a way that felt artificial. Boxes lined the hallway, neatly labeled in Celeste's clean handwriting. Office to storage, bedroom, photos. Nathaniel's books were gone from the shelves. The framed diploma he'd hung in the study was missing. Even the armchair by the window where he used to read after dinner had been stripped of its cushion. I walked room to room, stunned by the efficiency. It had only been 2 weeks. She must have started packing the moment the funeral guests pulled out of the driveway. On the dining table sat a single envelope, my name in block letters on the front. Inside was a list of remaining personal items Celeste had deemed appropriate for me to keep. A scarf, a photo album, a ceramic coffee mug with a faded quote from one of Nathaniel's favorite novels. That was all. The kitchen, once warm with clutter, gleamed like a showroom. Even the refrigerator had been wiped of magnets and notes. The calendar where I used to write appointments in pencil had been replaced with a digital wall display. Cold light instead of ink. I thought back to the funeral. How Celeste had stood beside the podium in heels that clicked across the marble floor. The slideshow played exactly 17 minutes. The coffee, the pastries, the placement of every chair perfect. Too perfect. Not a single stammer in her voice when she spoke about him. And no one, not a neighbor, not a cousin, not even his college roommate, had asked if I needed a ride home. I told myself it was grief, that maybe Celeste didn't know what to say, that the silence in the car afterward was respect, not distance. But then I looked around again and saw my name missing from the memory of this house. Even the mug had been washed and dried, sitting quietly on the counter waiting for someone who no longer belonged. So I opened the study door, unsure of what I was looking for. only knowing there had to be something she hadn't cleared out yet. Celeste didn't hand it to me herself. One of her assistants dropped it off at the house later that afternoon in a plain white bag with the law firm's name printed in pale gray. No card, just a note in typed font. Nathaniel asked me to give you this. Signed, C. Inside was a small black box, the kind that usually held cufflinks or watches. I opened it slowly, half hoping for a letter, a scrap of his handwriting, something with weight. Instead, there was a tie clip. Silver. Plain. One I didn't recognize. Nathaniel had owned dozens, some from his early days, teaching others from conferences or gifts from students. This one didn't mean anything. It wasn't engraved. It wasn't even something he wore often. It felt like a placeholder, a gesture with the substance removed. I set it on the desk in the study and sat down, the chair creaking under me. The desk was too clean, the drawers nearly empty, but one of them, the lower left, stuck when I pulled. It had always done that. Nathaniel used to joke it was the house's way of keeping secrets. Inside were a few receipts, a dried-out pen, a hotel notepad scribbled with grocery items. Nothing important. But beneath the drawer lining, just under the wood edge, something caught. I tugged gently and pulled out a thin manila folder, sealed but brittle. There were only 3 pages inside. The top one handwritten in shaky script that was unmistakably his. Read, Celeste wants me to update the will. Says it needs to reflect current holdings. I asked why now. She says it's for clarity. I think she's being careful. Too careful. I haven't told Ma. She'd see right through it. I read it twice before I could breathe. The second page was a partial draft of the will with red marks through the margins. My name was there then, crossed out with a note beside it. Discuss with C. The third page listed appointments I never knew he had. 2 were scheduled on days he told me he was too tired to talk. I pressed my hand to the paper, feeling the shape of his fear hidden between each line. Then I picked up the phone and dialed the one number I hadn't called in years. Julian answered on the second ring. His voice hadn't changed, low, calm, thoughtful. I hadn't spoken to him since Nathaniel's memorial at the school 3 years ago. We'd exchanged nods that day, no words. He had always been closer to Nathaniel than to me, but I trusted him. Nathaniel did too. I found something I said, something he never told me about. I met him the next morning at a small coffee shop tucked behind the old library downtown. He arrived early, waiting at the corner booth with his coat folded beside him and 2 cups of tea already steeping. I slid into the seat across from him and handed him the manila folder. He read every word quietly, his brow tense. When he reached the redacted will draft, his jaw tightened. I knew something was wrong, he said finally. The last time we spoke, he asked me what happens if someone rewrites your intentions for you. Julian asked for copies, said he'd make a few calls, discreet ones. He knew someone at the bank that handled Nathaniel's trust accounts, and someone else who used to work in estate law before retiring. By the end of the week, he had answers. The transfer of control was processed 6 months ago, he told me over the phone. While Nathaniel was mid-cycle in his chemotherapy, the paperwork lists him as present and coherent. But that doesn't line up. It didn't. That week, Nathaniel had been in and out of the hospital, barely strong enough to eat. I remembered feeding him broth with a straw. He could hardly hold a pen. Julian dug deeper. There were also meetings scheduled at the firm in his name, 2 of them back to back, just a week before the update was finalized. No one told you. No, I said. No one told me anything. He sent me a copy of the appointment ledger. The names listed were associates from Celeste's firm. No medical proxy, no neutral counsel, just business. Nathaniel had always been careful, deliberate. He wouldn't have moved that fast unless he felt rushed or pressured. And yet he said nothing, not even to me. Not even when I was sitting right beside him. Julian found her first. Willa Chen. She had once worked as a legal assistant at Celeste's firm, though she'd since moved across the river and taken a job managing records at a medical office. He said she hadn't wanted to talk at first, but when he mentioned Nathaniel's name, there was a long pause. Then she agreed to meet. We sat together in the back corner of a quiet diner near the highway. Willa arrived with a notepad tucked under her arm, her hands fidgeting with the strap of her bag. She looked younger than I expected, maybe mid-30s, with tired eyes that stayed downcast until we were alone at the table. "I don't want trouble," she said first. "I have a daughter, a mortgage. I don't want to be dragged into anything. I'm not here to make noise," I told her. "I just want to understand what happened." She opened her notepad and flipped to a dog-eared page. "This was last fall," she said. "A Sunday evening. I came back to the office to drop off files, and Celeste was there with another associate. She asked me to witness a signature on trust documents." Her voice caught for a moment, but Nathaniel wasn't there. I stared at her. "You didn't see him sign, no." Celeste said he had just stepped out, that it was urgent. She told me to sign quickly. I asked once if we should wait, and she said no. "He approved it already," she said. I didn't argue. I needed the job. She slid the notepad across the table. The ink had faded slightly, but the words were clear. 4:45 p.m. "Sunday, no N present." C insisted. "That's my handwriting," she said. I wrote it down because something didn't feel right. I kept telling myself I was overthinking it. Julian nodded slowly. "Do you still have access to any firm copies' internal drafts?" She hesitated. "I kept one PDF on a drive I backed up before I left. I haven't opened it since." Her voice was barely above a whisper now. "I didn't think it would matter. I didn't think anyone would ever ask." I reached for the notepad and closed it gently. Then I thanked her, knowing the silence we'd both carried was finally starting to crack. The invitation came by courier thick cardstock tucked inside a navy envelope with the foundation's new seal embossed in silver. My name was spelled correctly, at least. "A gala. A tribute," Black Tie suggested. "Cocktails at 6, program at 7. Celeste would be stepping into Nathaniel's place as managing executive." That much was clear. Her name was listed beside his in the program preview, just beneath the tagline, "Continuing His Vision." I arrived 10 minutes before the program began. No one noticed me at first. I moved through the room like a shadow, the soft clink of glasses and polished conversation muffled under the weight of the chandeliers. Familiar faces nodded in passing donors. Former board members, people who had once hugged me at banquets and holidays, and now couldn't quite place me without Nathaniel beside me. Celeste stood near the stage, radiant in black satin, smiling with the effortless ease of someone who believed the story was hers now. She saw me just as I approached the seating area. Her smile flickered, not quite faltering, just pausing. She turned away before I could interpret it. I didn't speak. I didn't make a scene. Instead, I made my way to the third row and took a seat beside Lawrence Blaine, one of Nathaniel's earliest mentors and a founding board member. I greeted him quietly, handed him a sealed envelope, and said only, "This is for the board's eyes." Nothing more. He glanced at the envelope, his brow tightening at the sight of my name on the return label. He didn't open it, but he slipped it into his coat pocket with a silent nod. That was all I needed. The program began shortly after. A slideshow played soft piano music, underscoring Nathaniel's smiling face. Pictures from his youth, his teaching days, foundation events. Celeste stood at the podium and spoke with practiced grace, thanking everyone for their presence, promising a future built on strength, transparency, and vision. Her voice didn't tremble once. When the applause followed, it was polite, respectful, but I noticed Lawrence was no longer clapping. His hand rested near his chest, where the envelope still sat untouched but heavy. I left before dessert. I didn't need to hear anything else. The letter inside that envelope would speak louder than anything said from that stage. And by the time the board met again, the questions would already be waiting. 3 days after the gala, Julian called me early. No pleasantries. They postponed the vote, he said. The board isn't moving forward with Celeste's appointment. Not yet. He didn't need to say why. The envelope had done its job. By that afternoon, Celeste's legal team had sent a formal letter to my home. 4 pages printed on heavy paper, accusing me of defamation, interference, and character sabotage. They threatened to pursue damages if I continued to distribute what they called misinterpreted documents and hearsay. I read it 3 times. Then I placed it on the kitchen table and didn't touch it again. Julian and I met with Lydia, a probate litigator he trusted. She examined Willa's note, the draft will, with Nathaniel's edits and the timeline of Nathaniel's medical records. She asked one question. When exactly was the signature submitted? Julian pulled up the document metadata on his laptop. The signature had been added at 9:12 p.m. on a Sunday evening, exactly when Nathaniel had been admitted to palliative care. We confirmed it with hospital logs. He'd been heavily sedated, his motor skills nearly gone. There was no way he'd been lucid, let alone capable of signing legal documents. 2 days later, we heard from another source, a former junior associate from the firm who had quietly left months ago. He offered a sworn statement Celeste had instructed staff to expedite revisions and keep correspondence verbal only. He'd questioned the legality once and been shut down. By the end of the week, Celeste issued a public statement through the foundation. She would not be accepting the appointment in the interest of preserving Nathaniel's legacy and minimizing division during a delicate transition. There was no apology, no direct acknowledgement of what she had done, just a graceful bow, the kind that masks collapse. I didn't attend the next board meeting. I didn't need to. That evening, I opened the bottom drawer of Nathaniel's old desk. I had gone through it before, but this time I noticed the small, leather-bound journal tucked behind a stack of outdated files. Inside was an earlier version of the will, one I hadn't seen. There was no markup, no red ink, no crossouts. My name was printed clearly beside a paragraph outlining long-term co-stewardship of the foundation housing provisions and a personal note in his handwriting. She built this with me. Protect her always. He had signed it in ink. No witness, no lawyer, just conviction. I sat with that copy in my lap, not triumphant, but still, quiet, steady. The paper didn't erase the hurt, but it confirmed what I had felt all along. He had tried, and maybe that had to be enough for now. Lydia laid out the options on the table with clinical precision. I could sue. I had enough documentation to make a case for damages, breach of trust, maybe even fraud. The board, she said, would likely settle quietly. I could walk away with compensation, public acknowledgement, and a formal apology if I pushed hard enough. But I didn't want any of that. I don't want their money, I said. I don't even need their apology. I want the record corrected. I want the truth to outlive all of this. She paused, then nodded. Julian met me at the courthouse a week later. We carried a folder between us, the early will with Nathaniel's signature, Willa's statement, the digital metadata reports, and the journal page with his handwritten line. She built this with me. Protect her always. We filed them not under lawsuit, but historical correction, a legal motion to preserve documentation relevant to the foundation's origin. Julian called in a favor at the county archive office, and by noon the file was logged into the public record. When we stepped outside, the spring air felt honest. Not warm, not cold, just real. I kept thinking this would end in a courtroom, Julian said, as we walked back to the car. No, I told him. This ends where it began, with Nathaniel, with the truth. Later that afternoon, I received an email from the board chair. No headline, no flattery, just 2 sentences. Your name has been restored to the original charter. Co-founder, lifetime advisor. We've updated the archive effective immediately. I didn't reply. I just read it once and closed the laptop. Then I sat in the old garden chair Nathaniel built with his hands, the one he never bothered to seal properly, and let the quiet fill in the places that used to ache. There was no plaque, no press release, no spotlight. But in the documents that mattered in the structure he and I shaped from nothing, my name was there again. Not as a footnote, not as a courtesy, but as truth. And the truth, once spoken into daylight, doesn't vanish the way a person does. It stays. It stays for those who will look for it later, when the names have faded and only the roots remain. The tulips were just beginning to open when I returned to the garden. Nathaniel had chosen early bloomers for this space on purpose. He liked the idea of color arriving before the world was ready. It had been a while since I walked those paths. The benches were newly painted, and a few younger volunteers were arranging seed trays near the east fence. No one recognized me. I didn't expect them to. I moved toward the oak tree in the center, the one we planted together after the first community grant came through. Its branches stretched wide now, casting a soft shadow over the new dedication plaque embedded in the stone beneath, planted in memory of those who were never thanked out loud. I traced the edge of the inscription with one gloved finger. It wasn't flashy. It didn't mention names. But I knew what it meant, and so did the people who chose to place it there. I sat on the bench beneath the tree and watched the wind move through the petals. Somewhere in the background, a child laughed and a wheelbarrow creaked over the gravel. Life still unfolding, still making space. I hadn't come to be seen. I had come to see what was left standing after the noise was gone, and there it was, steady-rooted and enough.